Good morning. At the outset, I would like to extend my warmest greetings to the President of the National Council of Slovenia, His Excellency Alojz Kovšca. And together with him, I'm pleased to greet the authorities present, both religious and civil, and all participants to celebrate in this meeting organized by the same National Council in the collaboration with the Office of the Human Rights Ombudsman in Slovenia, the Commission Justice and Peace of the Slovenia's Bishops' Conference, as well as the Institute of Canon Law at the Faculty of Theology of the University of Ljubljana, the important milestone of 30 years of implementing the freedom of religion in the Republic of Slovenia. Today's event is part of a series of celebration of the 30th anniversary of the international recognition of the independence of Slovenia, which took place on 25th June 1991, and which the Holy See was also among the first countries to affirm. St. John Paul II, who visited Slovenia twice during his pontificate, spoke of that historical moment saying, "Your people are going through a time of radical change, while they are seeking gradually to free themselves from the negative consequences of the totalitarian ideology by which they have been strongly conditioned. They are striving with every effort to build a more fraternal and democratic society. However, it is still necessary to be particularly alert to preventing the acceptance of another equally dangerous ideology, that of unbridled liberalism, from filling the void left by the previous one." The declaration Dignitatis Humanae. The Declaration on Religious Freedom of the Second Vatican Council, Dignitatis Humanae, offered a new perspective with which the Church approached the question of religious freedom. It is a watershed document in the history of the Church, and it presents a significant basis for the social doctrine of the Catholic Church. It has become one of the most discussed ecclesiastical documents in the modern times. The contribution of Pope Paul VI to the outcome of this document was decisive. Intervening to vote on its structure during its writing and contributing to the definition of religious freedom as a right to immunity from any pressure or external coercion to one's personal assent of faith. It would seem useful also to understand his contribution in the light of his historical trip to the United Nations headquarters in New York in October 1965, as well as the Church's initial contacts with the communistic regimes aimed at improving the faith and legitimate freedoms of Christians and, more generally, of the population subjected to those regimes. The declaration was in fact, inter alia, an effective instrument to claim respect for the fundamental right of religious freedom in those countries, including Yugoslavia, where materialistic atheism was publicly promoted as the official position of the state. On the occasion of the 30th anniversary of the publication of Dignitatis Humanae, St. John Paul II stated, "The Second Vatican Council constituted an extraordinary grace for the Church and a decisive moment of her recent history. Dignitatis Humanae is undoubtedly one of the Council's most innovative texts. It has the specific and important merit of having cleared the way for the remarkable and fruitful dialogue between the Church and the world, so ardently proposed and encouraged by the other great Council document, the Pastoral Constitution Gaudium et Spes, issued on the very same day. Looking back over the last 30 years, it must be said that the Church's commitment to religious freedom is an inviolable right to the human person, has had an effect beyond anything the fathers of the Council could have anticipated. In order to grasp properly the relationship between the teaching of the Dignitatis Humanae and the magisterium that preceded it, it is necessary to understand the precise content of these teachings, without limiting oneself to a simple comparison of texts taken out of a literary or historical doctrinal context. At the outset, It is necessary to embrace as a criterion of interpretation the explicit affirmation of Dignitatis Humanae, that it leaves untouched the traditional Catholic doctrine on the moral duty of men and societies toward the true religion and toward the one Church of Christ. It would be a grave mistake to think that religious freedom appeared in the teaching of the Church only 50 years ago. Rather, it is a natural human right that Dignitatis Humanae itself recognizes as rooted in divine revelation and in the very nature of each person. The aspect of this freedom that concerns immunity from coercion from any human power, individual or social, is recognized by Dignitatis Humanae and is also a requirement of human reason. While this had always been implicit in the social teaching of the Church, both theoretical and practical, it has come to be more fully known to human reason through centuries of experience. In this sense, one could say that Dignitatis Humanae reaffirmed and deepened the need for legal protection of religious liberty, so that the freedom of the person acting on the truth in religious matters could be guaranteed. It is a development that the Compendium of the Social Doctrine of the Church calls a renewal and a continuity, a deepening, yet without distortion, of the theological and anthropological foundations. In our current context, Dignitatis Humanae offers well-formulated arguments for guiding the relationship between faith and reason, between religion and civil authority, essentially within the secular state. With this declaration, all the traditional key concepts, in particular the relationship between the state, truth, and tolerance, have been placed within a new perspective, that of the centrality of the dignity of the human person. Human dignity expresses the inalienable worth found in every person, without exception, regardless of their beliefs, their condition, or their ideas. As such, it must be defended from any power that denies or attempts to deny that it is one of the indispensable natural human rights. It is here that we see the limitation of the state's competency in the area of religious matters. The state, in this matter, must therefore acknowledge and respect the principle of religious freedom, which is the basis of every other freedom, starting with freedom of conscience. Moreover, this freedom should be understood merely as freedom from external imposition, via negativa, as a freedom from, but also as the freedom to seek, find, and adhere to the truth, via positiva, as a freedom for. In the first paragraph of Dignitatis Humanae, we read, "The truth cannot impose itself except by virtue of its own truth, as it makes its entrance into the mind of one's quietly and with power. This does not preempt the Church mission of bearing witness to the truth, but it does deny any illegitimate interference in this process. This frees religion without relegating it only to the private internal sphere from the intrusion or direct positive coercion, and prevents the state from any interference in the internal affairs relating to religious practice, teaching, and worship. In this sense, the Church holds firmly to its activity of proclaiming the gospel in the public sphere. Yet, this idea of being present in the public sphere excludes the possibility of the state attempting to impose it. The state, rather, must guarantee such religious activity through the principle of religious freedom. The function of government is to make provision for the common welfare. However, it would clearly transgress the limit set to its power, were it presumed to command or inhibit acts that are religious. Interestingly, Dignitatis Humanae does not consider the case of a Catholic state, but rather establishes a doctrinal framework aimed at protecting the freedom of the Church in all social, political, and cultural circumstances. Not surprisingly, the understanding of religious freedom becomes a challenge to the globalized world. In a speech addressed to the participants in the International Conference on the Religious Freedom and the Global Clash of Values, Pope Francis affirmed that reason recognizes in religious freedom a fundamental human right, which reflects the highest human dignity, the ability to seek the truth and conform to it, and recognizes in it a condition which is indispensable to the ability to deploy all of one's own potentiality. Religious freedom is not only that of private thought or worship. It is the liberty to live, both privately and publicly, according to the ethical principles resulting from found truth. This is a great challenge in the globalized world, where weak thought, which is like a disease, also lowers the general ethical level, and in the name of a false concept of tolerance, it ends in persecuting those who defend the truth about man and its ethical consequences. Now I'd like to speak about religious freedom and relationship between the Church and the state in the Republic of Slovenia. During his visit to Slovenia in 1996, Pope John Paul II said, "The fruitful relationship between culture and the gospel is also attested in your history in the areas of pedagogy, economics, and social and political activities, where we find exceptional personalities like Bishop Anton Martin Slomšek, whose first concern, together with the proclamation of the good news and the moral reform of the people, was always to the promotion of the national culture. Thus, Slovenians can offer numerous proofs of the effect of the gospel in all areas of life. Affirming this incorporation of the gospel in Slovenia's culture, we can ask ourselves how religious freedom is being guaranteed and how the relations between the Church and the state have been since Slovenia's independence. During the communistic regime, the Catholic Church was considered a permanent internal enemy of the state, and attempts were made at all costs to reduce its social and cultural influence. With its independence, this approach has thankfully changed. In Slovenia, the legal position of religious communities is based on the following constitutional principles. First, the separation of the state from religious communities. Second, the principle of equality of religious communities. And third, the principle of free activity. Your Constitution of 23rd December 1991 states in Article 7, the state and religious communities shall be separated. Religious communities shall enjoy equal rights. They shall pursue their activities freely. This article is interpreted as invoking the neutrality of the state regarding religious matters. The interpretation of the constitutional norm concerning the separation of the state from religious communities was one of the first tasks of the Mixed Commission set up by the Episcopal Conference and the government. In a special document of 1994, the Commission said it was in favor of a positive interpretation of the principle of the separation of the state from religious communities, in the sense of positive neutrality. This approach refers to a well-known unwritten principle followed by many countries, namely the constitutional principle of positive tolerance, which obliged the state to ensure a free space for the religious activities and individuals and religious communities. Regarding the relationship of the Catholic Church in this country, the agreement between the Holy See and the Republic of Slovenia on judicial matters was signed on 14th December 2001 and ratified in 28th May 2004. As another positive sign of the good collaboration between the state and the Catholic Church, we can also include the reintegration of the Faculty of Theology at the University of Ljubljana on 18th November 1992, which in 1952 has been removed by the government. Speaking of the need for the renewed dialogue between culture and Christianity, St. John Paul II highlighted that Slovenia has made a great and promising step in this direction with the reintroduction of theology faculty in the university. Within the framework of the other disciplines, while theology shows it fully accepts the challenge of rationality, it cannot fail to call on rationality itself to be open to the mystery that transcends it. Then, in fulfilling its task, the presentation and thorough study of the truth of the gospel, it also casts light on the meaning of life and history, thereby making an irreplaceable contribution to building up the world and promoting human coexistence. Conclusion. In today's world, characterized by cultural pluralism and by ever wider interpretation of human rights, religious freedom as understood in Dignitatis Humanae continues to reveal its fundamental cultural and political relevance. It should not be understood merely as a lack of oppression and repression, but as a proactive enhancement, the promotion of the person's freedom to express their beliefs without fear of persecution or social exclusion. Dignitatis Humanae has laid solid foundations for the principle of freedom, arguing that there can be no full and free religious fidelity without fidelity to one's conscience. In conclusion, I would like to recall the words that Pope Benedict XVI had dedicated to this theme, where he describes religious freedom as a need that derives from human coexistence, or indeed as an intrinsic consequence of the truth that cannot be externally imposed, but that the person must adopt only through the process of conviction. The Second Vatican Council, recognizing and making its own an essential principle of the modern state with the decree of religious freedom, has recovered the deepest patrimony of the Church. By so doing, she can be conscious of being in full harmony with the teaching of Jesus himself, as well as with the Church of the martyrs of all time. The ancient Church naturally prayed for the emperors and political leaders out of duty, but while she prayed for the emperors, she refused to worship them and thereby clearly rejected the religion of the state. Finally, I would like to express a particular gratitude for the respect and even esteem that Slovenia, a land, as St. John Paul II described, strewn with innumerable bell towers, churches, and chapels, which testify to the deep Christian roots of your people, has with the Catholic Church and the attention that the civil authorities has shown toward it and the Holy See. Our bilateral relations remain an important dimension of this mutual respect. May they continue to grow stronger. Thank you for your kind attention.